What is going on, guys? Gaston right here, and today we have one of the most important announcements that we are going to be making, at least for the past month. Sony finally confirmed the A7S III announcement. So this is going to happen on July 28th at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Guys, this camera is no longer a rumor. This camera is no longer a dream. So we're gonna stop leaking all this information and finally talk about the camera, how this camera performs. So pretty exciting. So we are assuming that it's going to be some sort of a web conference that we're gonna see much more like we have seen from Canon. And remember, they decided to wait for Canon to release the R5 and R6. And I'm sure that they did that to see how Canon actually perform and react. And I think that was super smart, you know. A couple of things that we know so far. This camera is going to have a 12 megapixel sensor. Also, this camera is going to be capable of 4K video up to 120 frames per second, 10-bit internally. This camera is going to have two SD card UHSII, so you're going to be able to use the same cards that you have laying around in your house. Now, one of the things that this camera is going to have, and we actually covered in one of our last videos, is the world's utmost resolution EVF with almost 10 million dots of EVF, 9.44 million dots EVF. Now, the other thing that we've been rumoring is that this camera may be able to output raw 4K video when recording via HDMI. In one of the videos that we just posted, we talked about the possibility of 16-bit raw HDMI 4K video recording. Now, we don't know if the rumor really talked about the 4K raw 16-bit or maybe 16-bit images. But once again, this is not a photography camera. This is a video-centric camera. So now one of the news that we actually covered here in the channel as well is that this camera is going to have S-Log3 with a base ISO of 160 versus the 1600 ISO that made it so hard to expose for this picture profile, let alone even grade the footage in post. I mean, one of the reasons why I never used S-Log3 was exactly because of that. Now, 160 base ISO, chances are that this is going to be kind of like HLG, but much flatter, yet super easy to grade in post. Now, the other thing that we know is that we're going to have 409 600,000 ISO, so 500,000 ISO in this camera, and kind of like the last version. But if you want to push this camera so high, you're going to have the bandwidth to do so. In this camera, we should see finally 15 stops of dynamic range. And remember, prior version had 13.4, I believe it was, which it was more like a 12 stops of dynamic range in some of the tests that people have done of the camera. Now, we're gonna have 15 stops of dynamic range, much more like the A7 III, so pretty much welcome. Now, this camera is not going to have a fan, and this is what I've been hearing. It's going to have a passive cooling system. So basically, passive cooling means no fan. Now, how Sony is going to implement it, we don't know. It talks about a brand new passive cooling system. So maybe the camera is going to have vents where the air can actually cycle through and the heat can escape. Remember, the R5 is completely weather sealed, and I think this is one of the main reasons why they're having so many problems. Now, if the camera has vents, will that actually affect weather sealing? We don't know, but we would have to wait and see on that one for the announcement. Now, one of the things that we're starting to hear is that this camera is not gonna overheat and it's not gonna have any recording limit. Now, this is going to be huge, guys, and probably bad news for Canon because a lot of people are gonna reconsider this, you know. I think that Canon, with their release, they got so much bad press in such a short amount of time that it's going to hurt a lot of their sales. And especially if Sony comes and say, hey guys, here we are, we'll give you a 4K video up to 120p, 10-bit, SD card, no overheating guaranteed, and also no recording limit. That's gonna be a tough one to swallow for Canon. Now, when it comes to the body of this camera, we're expecting this camera to be much more like the recent Sony cameras like the A9 and 7R4. So if that's the case, you know, we're gonna have a pretty familiar body, and especially because we're not gonna have a fan, I don't think there is a need to redesign the body. We're also gonna have the latest Sony battery that gives up more battery life than the A7S II, which it was actually terrible. So pretty good call here. Now, this one has to be one of the most interesting part of this camera because this camera is going to inherit the same articulated screen that we can find in the ZV-1. Finally, Sony is embracing this technology after many years and many cameras manufacturers actually having this technology. And even Olympus, that went out of business, had it way before. And finally, we're going to have in the A7S III, and you know, I can wait to see in the A7 IV, A7R5, and all the Sony cameras that are going to be coming out. Now, one thing that we wish is that for the first time, Sony would actually add touch screen capabilities. And this is the camera to actually do it. Remember, this camera can actually become the perfect content creation cameras for a video like this one. I'm by myself right here at the studio. And if I could actually press stuff rather than going behind the camera and touch all the buttons and dial, that would be great. So hopefully, that would be the way, but there's more type of scenario right here. So finally, this camera is going to see the light, and the rumor talks that Sony is going to start fulfilling orders around mid-August. So this is very exciting time, guys. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to be reconsidering your R5 or R6 purchase. And is this good enough for you? 4K 120, SD cards, the whole 9-yard flip out screen. Drop your comments down below. Let me know what you think about this camera, and let me know if you were thinking about the R5 and now you're switching to this one. So as always, guys, subscribe to the channel for more content like this one. And until then, see you in the next video.